We've been looking at, believe it or not, economics. And amen. Hope-de-do. And we've been learning that it is a science that studies the production and the manufacture and the distribution and the consumption of wealth in a society. And wealth are just basically goods and services. People produce goods and services, people distribute and market them, and then the people consume them, and that's basically what it is. And we've been observing that basically a society can set up one of two types of economic systems, what's called a command economic system, where there are some bosses that command what the products will be made, what the prices, they got price controls. Since they determine how many will be made, if there's not enough goods or services for the amount of people, then they ration them off, and they determine these things. And command societies, mercantilism, tribalism, caste system, Nazism, socialism, communism, those are command economies. And they make all the decisions up top, and you just get what they say. Then there's the other type on the other end of the spectrum is a free market economy, where the people are free and have liberty to pursue whatever interest they enjoy and produce whatever they want. Some guy likes to make bicycles, he makes bicycles. Some guy likes to bake cakes, he bakes cakes. And people do that, and then they actively trade with one another. I'll sell you this cake for $40,000, and the guy says no, and they finally work out a reasonable price. I'll buy it for $4, and he sells it. And the free market, the prices are determined by the people participating in it. The amounts of goods and services are determined by the people producing and saying, I'd like this kind of, I'd like a radio, and somebody says, I'll make radios, and that's a free market economy. Now, so you got these two different types of economies. And I guess we could sit like a philosopher and think, gee, I wonder which one would work. And that's what philosophers do. They do experiments in their mind. They're called rational experiments, where they reason things in their mind and they kind of guess how it might work. They'll use a term, it's called a priori. The experiment is done before the fact. The guy does it in his mind. It's prior to actually running the thing. Okay, so we can have a priori rational philosophical arguments as to whether command would work better or whether free market will work better. The philosophers say, command market works better because some very intelligent people will figure out what the real needs are and make sure they're gotten out there. And the problem with a free market, he says, is you got individual people making decisions and they don't know what they're doing. And so we need some smart people in charge of this. That's the rationality for a command society. Most of the elites in our government today, that's the way they think. Okay, I don't know if you're aware of that. Like a Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, they're elitists. They think they should be making the decisions. That's the way they think. Okay, and the other people would think this other way. And so you can have this idea, but can we ever figure out which one would work? Well, thankfully, there have been experiments tried. And now we can look at it after the fact. We don't have to look at it just in principle or in our mind. We can actually look at how did it work. And so let's go back and look at the United States of America and see how this started out. And it was actually, both systems were tried here in the United States of America when we began. When the first settlers came to America, this was back in 1607. What had happened was, back in England, King James I had determined, that's the same king that God commissioned to write our Bible, had determined that there would be a company that he would permit in his country. It was called the Virginia Company. And it was, he called it a corporation. And a corporation was empowered by the Crown of England. And he said, here's what, I'm going to allow you to govern yourself. I'm going to trust you to govern yourself. And that's what corporations do. When you start a corporation, you put together bylaws. And in the bylaws, you determine how you're going to govern. And that's one of the liberties a corporation is given. You can govern yourself. We're not going to tell you how to govern. You can govern yourself. And if you do a good job of governing yourself, you'll stick around and you'll last. And if you do a bad job of governing yourself, you'll kind of implode and die and go bankrupt. And so King James gave this company, the Virginia Company, in April the 10th, 1606. He chartered them and said, you can form a company to establish settlements on the coast of North America. And so the principle was established that a royal colony would be self-governing, and this formed the beginning of the American experiment. And they sent some folks over here. This is written in a book called The Noblest Triumph, Property and Prosperity Through the Ages by Professor Tom Bethel. And so these folks came over here, and when they were coming over here on the boat, they're thinking, what would be a good way for us to set up the economy here in America? And they said, well, when we get there, there's going to be some property. Why don't we all own the property in common, like a communal property, and everybody will work the property, and we'll take all the goods and put them together into one large basket, and then we'll distribute it to the people. And so they started out with communal ownership of land and the property, and as a result of that, most of them starved to death and died of disease. And within a couple of years, let's see, I think it was 104 people showed up, and within 2 years, everyone was dead but 38. And the reason, what happened was people just got lazy. They figured, look, everyone's working. Why don't I just play poker and spend some time playing solitaire, let them work, and we all eat out of the common basket. And people didn't produce, and the amount of food went down. And when food goes down, starvation sets in. When starvation sets in, even if it's not starvation to kill you, but just enough where your body is depleted of nutrients, it becomes susceptible to infection. One of the things that follows lack of food intake when it's too small is infections take over, and many of them died. So back in England, when they heard about it, they said, well, since 104 are now down to 38, let's send more recruits their way. So they sent another 500 people their way to settle. And this is in Jamestown, Virginia, where this was all happening. And within 6 months, 440 of those were dead by starvation and disease. And this happened over and over again. So they're trying to figure out why is this happening. Somebody came and looked at it, and he said the starvation was so bad that we had come across one of the Indians that had died, and of course we buried him with a Christian burial. But when we were starving, we got so hungry we dug him up and ate him. And cannibalism set in. And of course, the Bible talks about cannibalism. It's something that's happened in the past, and it will happen again in the tribulation. When the starvation happens in the trib, people will be eating dead folks. But this happens. And the starvation, somebody observed, the reason was not a lack of resources, because there were plenty of resources in America. The reason was a lack of industry and an unwillingness to work. So in 1611, King James sent Sir Thomas Dale over to look at this thing and figure out what was going on. And he noticed most of the settlers had now starved to death. And the remaining settlers, instead of planting and working, were spending their time in the streets playing games. And he said, you know what the problem is? The problem is this communal property system we got here. Because in this communal property system, there really isn't incentive to work. In the communal property system, it says if we have 10 men, and the 10 men's job is to make 10 bushels of corn. So 10 times 10 is 100 bushels of corn. And so each man knows he's got to do his 10 bushels. And then the guy says, you know what, I think I'll just go play games, because we're all going to divide the 100. And so I put in 10, I get 10 out. But what if I play games the whole week? I put nothing in, so my 10 is missing, only 90 shows up, but when we divide it 10 ways, I still get 9 bushels of corn for not putting 1 ounce of labor in. And one of the problems that takes over is what God knows, the sin nature, the selfish, greedy. Communism is one of the greediest systems on the planet. It's a very greedy system. Socialism is greedy. Nazism is greedy. Tribalism and mercantilism are all greedy systems. Capitalism is greedy. It may be, but if you don't produce, you ain't going to eat. And in those systems, you don't have to produce, and you still won't eat. Eventually, the system will collapse. But anyways, they noticed it's this communist system that's not working here. So here's what I'm going to do. From now on, every man, you get 3 acres of land. It's yours, yours, and yours. You now own those 3 acres. Whatever you produce, you keep. and all you got to do is give to us. I think he had a 2.5 barrels of corn is all we're asking for you to give us to share for the poor people. But the rest, whatever you make for your family, whatever you sell, you can have. And now the guy's got an incentive to work and an incentive to make more. And what happened is immediately the colonies developed this distinguishing characteristic of America, the idea of how can I be creative and make the most of what I have. This inventiveness, experimentation. Some guy said, maybe if I plant this way, maybe if I water it this way, maybe if I try this way. And the yield began to grow and grow and grow. And the Indians watched this thing. Initially, the Indians watched these people come from England and a bunch of lazy bums that didn't work, and they just shook their head and go, what a bunch of bums they are. They're asking us for corn. They don't even take care of themselves. But now all of a sudden, 5 years later, when everybody's got private property, they're awash in corn, and now they start trading with the Indians. And all of a sudden, not only did production go up, but trade began to go up, and friendship began to go up. And there was no longer fights between the Indians and the colonists, because the colonists were producing stuff the Indians wanted, and the Indians said, well, here, I'll give you some of these leather goods I have, some of these beads I had, and trade went back and forth. And you don't fight with trading partners. And so fights started to go down. And it's very nice. And so this mutual advantage of this system of more production and more prosperity and more peace and more giving. I don't know if you've noticed that, but people who have are more likely to give than people that don't have. It's hard to give when you don't have. And so Sir Thomas Dale's decision to give this 3-acre plot to these people in Jamestown worked so well that the whole idea of a property system was expanded. And there's a book by Professor Walton and Rockoff called The History of American Economy. And as a private landholdings, and people began to get private, replaced this common communal ownership, work incentive improved. All of a sudden, by 1618, they were now giving 50 acres of land to people because they saw people have an amazing ability to work. And so you give a family 50 acres of land, the father works, the kids work, the wife is working, everybody's working, and a remarkable turnaround occurred in the United States of America, all because they stopped command economy, communism, if you will, and they went to free market economy, capitalism. And so capitalism initially saved America in the beginning. Now I was just talking about what's happening in Jamestown. The same thing was happening in the other colony up in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And up in Plymouth, Massachusetts, when they first got here, they tried the same thing. They adopted communal land ownership. It was a wrong-headed decision. They thought people would, I don't know, what they were counting on, the mistake of communism, tribalism, socialism, is the mistake of thinking people are inherently good. And they're not inherently good. Capitalism doesn't work because people are good. It works because people are inherently a little bit selfish. And God understands this. That's why he put it in the book of Proverbs. So let them own land, let them produce, and let them sell. Because their nature, I want something for me. The only way I'm going to get something for me is if I make something for you. And the only way I'm going to get it from you is if I make something good for you and I make it at a reasonable price. That puts me to work. Even though I'd rather sit in bed all day, I realize if I don't get out of bed and do something, I'm not going to survive. My family's not going to survive. And in trying to make me and my family survive, you get blessed. And so this is just the truth. And so this is kind of what happened. And the 101 people, though, arrived up in the north in Plymouth, Massachusetts, were dead. Most of them were dead within a few months. And who wrote in his little book here on the Plymouth Plantation. This was Bradford. Governor Bradford observed what was happening up on the Plymouth Plantation. He noticed that initially people were not working, and the clothes they came over with and the bed coverings they came over with, as they didn't work, and they had no food. They got so desperate, they would go to the Indians and they would sell away their clothes. They would sell away their bed coverings. They would become servants to the Indian. They would run around and cut wood and fetch them water for a capful of corn. Others just fell to plain old stealing day and night from the Indians. And in the end, it came to a misery that we starved and we died with cold and hunger. And it was just a terrible time. So what we did, he said, after a while, we decided that every family should now own a parcel of land. And we arranged for each family to have a couple of acres of land. And he writes in his little diary of Plymouth Plantation, he says, and we had very good success. For all of a sudden, everybody became industrious, and more corn was planted than any would have happened by any means of me giving a decree as the governor. All of a sudden, the women now went willingly into the fields, and they took their children with them to set corn. Before, they used to say, oh, we're too weak, and we can't do this. You can't have women and children doing this. But all of a sudden, when there was a profit motive for their family, they were out in the fields doing it too. And he said, if I compelled them, they wouldn't have listened. I could have been a tyrant and oppressed them, and it wouldn't have gotten anywhere. But now they willingly went into the fields, and they took their little ones with them. Immediately, people who used to be lazy became very industrious. Women who had pleaded, oh, we're too frail. Now they worked long and hard hours once they saw that their family could benefit from the hard work. Governor Bradford noticed the disastrous policy of collectivism, communism, that started actually by a Greek philosopher named Plato. He was the first one that did an experiment in his mind that, if we just all shared the property. Marx didn't come up with this stuff, just like Darwin didn't come up with evolution. These men just became folks that kind of all put it into one little book. So Darwin put evolution in a book, but the Greeks had come up with the concept of evolution centuries before. And Marx put it in a little book called the Communist Manifesto. Marx was not an economist. He was actually a lazy philosopher, but he was an idiot. He was a lazy, God-hating idiot. But nonetheless, he put it in this Communist Manifesto. But it was the Greek philosopher Plato who came up with the idea that collective ownership would work. But his student Aristotle said, that's not going to work. I've watched people, and I know how they are. And so what happened is they turned the whole thing around. Under the communist land ownership, workers' attempts to exploit their fellow workers through free rides, through not working. That's how you exploit folks, is you don't work. You expect them to work for you and give to you. Today we call it welfare. Okay? I don't work, you serve me. And as a doctor, it's a funny thing. The worst patients I had were the Medicaid patients, in every which way or form. But the worst thing about them was their attitude. They had an entitlement attitude that you would not believe. When I would take care of someone from the GM plant or someone who was a regular working guy, he was thankful. He would listen. But when I would take care of someone from Medicaid, they used to fire me. You're fired. Get out of here. See, you're not even paying for me. I was just amazed. And I'm the only one here at this. I was at one hospital. I was the only anesthesiologist. You can't fire me. I'm your only shot at going to sleep for this procedure. But they just have a belligerent, rotten attitude. This is how people take advantage of one another, through free rides. And so that's kind of what happened. The capitalist system saved the suffering American settlers in the beginning in the 1600s. And again, it was King James that sent that one nobleman over here, took a look at it and said, you know what, private property, that's the only way it's going to work. Securing property rights allowed America to flourish. The colonies flourished. Economic freedom caused us to thrive economically. The freedom allowed each worker in America to harness his own talent and the natural resources that were all over this land, and each region began to make the most use of its various advantages. For example, down in the southern colonies, they were good at growing staples because a little southern in America, the climate is more temperate. So they were much better at growing rice and wheat and grains and cotton and corn and tobacco. In some of the middle states, they had real good places where they could keep cattle, and they did that. Now, the northern states were a little colder, but those northern colonies had a lot of coastline to them, and they became very good at fishing. Commercial fishermen, because they were good at fishing, they learned how to build ships. Because, the Bible says, whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might. For there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave, whither thou goest. So work now. You don't know what it's going to be like later on when you're dead. Work while you're alive. In all labor there is profit. That's Proverbs 14, verse 23. In all labor there is profit. But the talk of the lips tendeth only to penury. That's to being poverty, broke. If all you are is a talker, like a philosopher, and that's one of the reasons most philosophers and academics in the colleges are big on communism, because they're not workers. If they were, they'd be out in the workforce. The whole college system in America is a mess. You shouldn't allow people to teach who haven't worked for 20 years in the workforce. That's the only thing people should be teaching. There's no such thing as getting a teaching degree and going to be a teacher. That's a bunch of baloney. Get out and work for 20 years. Best professor I ever had in school was an economics professor. He was 65 years old. He had worked at GM for 30 years. And when he taught us economics, he knew it firsthand because he was there. And he said, we used to do this, we did that, this works this way, this works that way. Not some theoretical stuff, practical, real experience. That's the kind of teachers that are needed. Unfortunately, in colleges, you got a bunch of tenured talking heads, talk of the lips, leadeth only to penury, and they're just angry because they don't think they think they should be paid more. That's the problem with them. That's why they're always going on strike, asking for higher pay, and they're trying to get unions together to jack their pay rates up. They're not even worth what they're getting now. That's another story. Anyways, in the North, what happens is people take their talents and they put it to work. Shipbuilding became very successful and profitable up in Massachusetts and those New England colonies. Around 1710, people began building boats for their own fishing, just privately for their family. But by 70 years later, they had experienced shipbuilders. I mean, there were miles of coastline, there were harbors, there were bays, there was lots of raw material, oak forests and things like that. And they would build these simple wooden vessels for commercial fishing, but then they started to use them for trading. And they became what's known as merchant marines. Okay, they would take their merchandise and they would ship it on the waterways, either up and down the coast or through the rivers, or they'd build canals. And because of this, shipbuilding was necessary. Not everybody was good at building ships, but people were good at different things. So some people were good at wood, so sawmills were started to support that industry. Because of that, somebody needed to know how to work with canvas, sail makers, and people began sewing and making sailing, the sails. People began learning how to work on the harbors and make rope walks so people could get around the harbor, how to make railways, marine railways to get around. Owners got together and they put together what's called chandleries, which was kind of like an auto parts store for ships. And they would have all kinds of supplies like a turpentine, tar, pitch, linseed oil, varnish, various tools, axes, hammers, chisels, boat hooks, nails, spikes, brooms, mops, leather goods. And all these industries spawned and grew up around the fact that they needed to make boats. This is how the free market works. Something is needed. Other people say, hey, I can't do all of that, but I can do this little part here. I can do this little part here. And little family businesses began growing up that were given down the line from father to son to grandson, and they supported all this. And this is how the American economy thrived. It had nobody at the top calling the shots. It had the people just tending to what the needs in the society were and working. This is how a free market works. Now, let me see. I wanted to show you. I need to make copies. How many folks are in here? Yeah. What do you need, about 20 copies of each one? 20 copies of each one? So what had happened was you see people becoming to be very industrious and working at what their talents are. And shipbuilding industry opened up bigger markets for many other merchants, for many other entrepreneurs, for many artisans. The shipbuilding then be used for the farmers to move their crops and the grain. And the American economy became very vigorous and strong. And not only that, we began trading with other colonies and trading overseas. And this growing merchant class grew and grew and grew. And the American economy, let's see, they started out in about 1630. By 1690, it was 10 times, it was 100 times larger than it had been when it started. 100 times growth because people work. The greatest resource in a country is the people. Amen. You can have a land full of resources, but if people don't work, the diamonds, the gold stays underground, the forests never get cut down, nothing gets built. It's the people. As a matter of fact, if you ever buy a house or have one built, okay, you will find that almost 2/3 of the cost of the building of your house is the labor. Only 1/3 is the raw material. That's why people like to contract their own house. They think they can do it cheaper, and hopefully they can. Usually end up making mistakes and end up in cost overruns making mistakes. But the reality is a skilled, labored workforce is the best thing, but it's also the most expensive part of the price of that house. It's the people. That's the greatest resource. You need people to work. People will not work when they're under a communist, socialist, Nazi, mercantile system where someone else is telling them what they can do and someone's putting regulations in their way. Ron, you getting any copies in there? I don't hear a single copy coming out of there. Can you? Oh, do you? Oh, good. Good. So what I want to show you is the free market. Now, you're not going to have utopia. You're not going to have nirvana. You're not going to have heaven on earth. God's not expecting it. Just like you're not going to have, if you will, perfect health. I mean, I've talked to you about the Bible and health. If you started to follow the Levitical diet, you would have good health, but not perfect health. Because some of us have genetic alterations inside of us. Some of us have weak organs. For example, with me, I got a weakness in my liver I was born with. I was born with a tumor in my left kidney. So, I'm born with a couple of things behind the 8 ball already. I'm not going to be perfect, no matter how well I take care of myself. But I can be okay. I can be good. I also can be a fool and make things a lot worse. There are things I could eat that could just pummel my liver and my kidney and really put me into illness. It's the same with an economy. God says, look, you take this economy, you do it the way I say, free market capitalism, a free market out there. Your economy will be as strong as it can be. It's going to have some weaknesses to it because why? There are going to be some weak people. There's going to be some blind people. There are going to be some deaf people. There are going to be some people with lack of talent. It won't be a perfect society, but it'll be as good as it's going to be able to get. You put another system in there, socialism, communism, welfarism, Nazism, tribalism, and that's like putting bad food in your body. It's going to be weaker than it could be. Those same blind people are still going to live under socialism and communism. Those same and the lazy people are really going to manifest themselves when they no longer work. So I want to show you that what God wants is He wants the people free. He wants the people to be able to earn by labor, through labor, what they do earn, to retain it for their family, so the wise man can leave an inheritance to his children and his children's children. And he's wise because he has learned how to save. God wants you ideally get married, have children, work, and save and give. Those are the things he wants. And he said, and I give a government, and the government's purpose is to, anybody's a bad guy, put the evil away. Anyone who's using crime against another person in that society, take care of them, isolate them, quarantine them if necessary. Not only tooth for tooth and limb for limb, but if they kill someone, life for life, kill them, get rid of the criminals. So that the government's job, restrain the evil, the society's job, get to work, the church's job, promote good, and if everybody's in their place, you'll have a decent society till Jesus comes back. The problem is when the government begins to think it can take part of the church's role and part of God's role and can determine this is the price something is going to be. You're going to see every time price controls have been given, every time, no matter who did it, whether it was a dictator in Cuba or a president in the Oval Office. The minute that is done, you're going to get scarcity of that good. When those numbskulls back in the 70s tried to put price controls on gasoline and oil, we had gas lines. And I want to show you now why this is. I got a couple of things here. First one is the one that shows you small business expenses. I just want to take a look at a small business, and the reason I want to do that, I don't want you thinking in numbers like billions, so let's think in numbers we can think. But the same principles apply. Something that works in your family, in a small business, works in a large corporation. One of the great lies that has been taught by the universities is a lie called Keynesian economics. He was a numbskull economist that was half Marxist that unfortunately was the counselor to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, our worst president. It'd be my assessment. But remember, I judge presidents based on the Constitution. So he's the worst we've ever had, according to the Constitution. But he had this guy Keynes advising him. And this guy Keynes had a crazy notion that what works on the small level has different laws that apply on the big level. And so you can do things on the big level that you couldn't do on the small level. So on the small level, it's not a good idea to go into debt. Have any of you been successful with your family going into debt? Is it a wise thing to go into debt? Is it a good idea for you to spend $10,000 a year more than you make, and do that consistently every single year, year in and year out? Does that work in your family? Well, Keynes said it doesn't work in a family, but it works in the government. And deficit spending is good for the government. And so the numbskulls, beginning with FDR, started deficit spending, and that's good. It's good for the government. It's not good on the small. It's not good on the large. Okay, the same law. The laws don't change. Okay, the same law of gravity that works on a little salamander also works on an elephant. Okay, actually, the consequences are even bigger. The salamander can fall 5 feet and maybe live. You drop an elephant 5 feet on his head, I don't know with all that weight if he's going to make it. The law is even getting more powerful when something's bigger. Jesus said, if you can't be faithful in the small thing, I'm not going to commit the large thing to you. You don't get the principles right on the small level. There's no way I'm giving the big stuff to you, because you don't have the principles. So we're going to look here at small business. I just want to show you. Let's take a look. Let's pretend you had a small business. Let's pretend your small business was ice cream. You like to give ice cream to kids and to people that want a nice ice cream cone. Okay. So what do you got to go? Hey, honey, let's start an ice cream shop. I mean, I lost my job. Well, let's go into business for ourselves. We'll do an ice cream shop. People seem to like ice cream. Seems to be a popular thing around here. Let's do it. I got a friend of mine is talking about doing this. Well, one thing is you're going to need rent. Number one on your list. You're going to have to find a place where you can actually operate that business. So you're going to have rent. You're going to need equipment. If it's a soft serve ice cream, you're going to need some machines. Even if it's not soft serve, you're going to need refrigerators and freezers to keep the ice cream. You may need vehicles to pick stuff up, maybe to deliver. I don't know what you're going to do. You may want computers, copiers, cash registers. I don't know. You're going to need equipment. You're going to need supplies then. That would be the very raw materials. I don't know what it takes to make ice cream. I imagine there's ice and there's cream. I'm not good in the kitchen. I don't know. You're going to need those two things. So you got to buy supplies. And then additionally, you're going to have to buy office supplies, to keep inventory and stuff like that. You're going to have to pay for utilities. Okay, electricity, heat, maybe telephone, maybe an internet service. I don't know. You're going to need insurance. Insurance is for property loss and liability. And do you folks understand the concept of insurance, how it even started and what it's about? I mean, I just give you a quick notion as to how and why the insurance industry started. It's a good, again, it was an industry. A bunch of people got together. It didn't start by government. It started actually by some of those people that were making the boats in New England and in England. And they would take their boats and they would take their material and they would sell across the Atlantic Ocean. So we'd make a bunch of stuff in North America and we'd take a boat, load it up and take it over to England and sell a bunch of stuff there. Then we'd maybe get some goods from the English people, bring it back here and sell it here. That's nice. But then there was this one problem. Every so often a boat would sink. There would be like a terrible storm, and we'd lose a boat. Now, as you saw, most of the boat owners were just private guys like with a family. So here's this one family business, the McIntyres, and they got a shipping industry. They got a couple of boats, and it took them years to, grandfather, father, son, and now they got 3 boats that they've built over these generations. They're good, they're quality, a lot of hours went into it, a lot of labor, a lot of price, and now they lose one of them in a big storm. That's a major loss. And sometimes they don't have the capital, the cash on hand to replace it or get another one, and that's maybe a $200,000 loss. So what happened, a bunch of shippers were together in a place called London, in a cafe, I think it was Lloyd's of London, and they were sitting together, a bunch of these boat guys, and they said, it's just awful. I mean, I lost one of my boats, and now I'm bankrupt, and so, and they're talking about it, and they said, and when we don't have enough individually to pay for a loss, and somebody said, hey, let's insure one another. Let's pool our resources. We got 40 of us here, and the cost of one of them boats is $200,000, and none of us got that, but we each got $5,000. Let's put our 40 times 5 in a kitty, and we got this, and if one of us loses, we'll use that to replace our boat. And so they insured one another to help keep things going. That's how the insurance industry started. They each put a little bit up, they put in a common fund, they kept it together, and if one of them suffered a loss, boom, we took care of Mr. McIntyre. Now everybody, another $5,000 in for the next loss, and everybody put it in. You say, well, that's not a good deal. What if I don't lose anything? Well, then don't join the insurance fund. Then self-insure. And if something happens, you pay the full $200,000 loss. Your decision. Nobody's forcing you in. It's a free market. But people joined. And that's how insurance began. That's what you do with your car. I mean, well, that's another story. The government's now manipulated that market so much. Now it's wrecked. The government, everything it touches, it ruins. I'll try and teach you that. But I'm looking at the freedom of it. The true freedom in an automobile market, it would work like this. The government has ruined it through the government and their lawyers. But if it were a free market right now for your auto insurance, I don't know what you pay for a car, maybe $20,000, and it's a lot of money to you. And if it's an accident, some drunk guy hits it and totals your car, you'd be out 20 grand. So would it be worth it to you to buy insurance to insure against that happening? So if it does happen, you're going to get another car. You would. And the cost, and I did the numbers, it would be about $200 a year is all it would cost you in insurance to have insurance for collision and property damage. Does anybody pay $200 a year for insurance? You paying a little more than that, are you? Yeah, you pay more than that a month. Now I'll explain to you why, because that's the government ruined that system. The government and the lawyers have destroyed that system. But nonetheless, we can talk about that another time. I'll show you how government, everything it touches, it destroys. When it does stuff God didn't tell it to do. God said, your job is armies, policemen, judges, and jails. Restraint of evil. That's all your job is. The minute you do anything else, God says, I can't let you be successful. You think you can break my law and profit? You think you can break my law and I'm going to make a success of you? I'm going to bust you up so bad. Now, if the people don't see it, that's their problem, but I'm not going to let it work. And so they've destroyed every industry they've touched. They've destroyed the auto insurance industry. They've destroyed the medical industry. Any industry they touch, they destroy. But nonetheless, take a look here, going back to small business expenses, and we can look at all their damage later. Okay, so here you are. You got rent, you got equipment, you got supplies, you got utilities, you got insurance. Now you got wages. You got workers, you got to pay them. Okay? Then you're going to have maintenance costs. I mean, if your equipment breaks down, you got to repair it. You like to clean your ice cream shop. I mean, by the end of the day, it can get kind of messy. You know, kids come in, they drop a little ice cream. If you don't clean it, the next morning you show up, there's flies buzzing around. It kind of puts a damper on the customers coming in for business. They don't like that. So, you know, maintenance costs for cleaning. Fees to the government, registration, renewals. It's another farce, but this is all stuff that came later on. Fees, professional services of accountants, attorneys, bookkeepers, tax preparers, all stuff invented by the government. Without them, most of it wouldn't even need. Then taxes, local business taxes, property taxes, federal taxes, state taxes, income taxes. And then, I don't know, if you travel, hopefully with a little small ice cream shop, you don't have to travel, no air, auto, train, bus, training for conferences, seminars, courses. Hopefully you don't need any of that. So there it is. Now, what I did was I put together an example on the other sheet. And let's say, so you're sitting down, you and your spouse, and you're talking to these two people who now own the ice cream shop. And they've been in business for 3 years. And they say to you something like this: last year, our little ice cream business took in $440,000. And then you go home and you say to your spouse, man, they're rich. They took in $440,000 last year. $440,000. And then the president comes on, and it's about time those rich people pay their fair share. And I want to raise the taxes on people that make more than $200,000. Sounds right to me. You're making more than $200,000. You ought to be paying. That's right. Let's raise their taxes. Okay, let's take a look at what a business really makes when it makes $440,000. I'm going to give you an example right here. I'm a $440,000 business, and we're going to take a look at the distribution of where that $440,000 went in the course of 1 year. They had to pay rent. If they're paying rent of a good space in Amherst or Orchard Park, you're going to spend a few thousand a month on rent, and that's going to be about I got a $3,200 a month. That's $38,000 a year in rent. They're going to need equipment. That's going to cost them about $9,000 a year. They're going to need the supplies. This is the raw materials to make their ice cream. That's really important. That is, after all, what they're selling. So they got to get the supplies. If it's a fast food restaurant, they got to buy the chicken wings. They got to buy the French fries. They got to buy the stuff. That's what's going out the door. That's going to be a major hit on them. That's going to be about 18% of their expenses a year, $78,000. Utilities can be about 2% of their expenses, about $9,600 a year. Insurance. Well, if they can get some good policies and the cheapest you can, you get on the phone with Geico or Progressive or something like that, you get maybe about $3,800 a year. Wages. Now, this is where you got to pay folks. I tell you, the most important thing, I need laborers. Without laborers, I need some kids to make the ice cream. I need some kids to serve the ice cream. I need some kids to run the cashier. Let's say I need, let's say I want to stay open 80 hours a week. You know, that's reasonable. I mean, you're not going to be open at night, so you can get rid of those sleeping hours, those 40 hours. It's about 80 hours a week. I'm open, let's say, from 11 in the morning to maybe 10 at night, Monday through Thursday, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I got a few extra hours, and it adds up to about 80 hours. So 80 hours, that's two 40-hour shifts. And each 40-hour shift, I need 5 kids. I need 10 kids. So there's my cost at today's minimum wage, and I want to show you how that'll ruin everything if you raise the minimum wage. Anytime government gets involved, problems. But there's going to be their cost, $134,000 a year in wages. Maintenance fees, about $9,600 a year. Fees to the regulations, and you got to get the state health department and get your license and all that kind of stuff, about $9,600. And then, of course, taxes. And there's your taxes at about the 26% rate that they're going to pay between the state taxes and the federal income taxes and the FICA taxes, about $115,000. And there's their profit. After all that stuff is added up I just gave to you, the profit on a $440,000 business a year is 7%, $30,960. That's their profit. By the way, that's good. Not many folks are working on a 7% profit margin. Here's the reason why. A competitor will open next door and says, if I whittle my profit margin down to 6%, then I can cut maybe about $5,000, and I'll cut $5,000 off the price of my ice cream cones, and they'll buy mine rather than his. And then if they buy more mine, 6% of a greater number is more than 7% of a smaller number, so I'm willing to do it for a little less, so I can get more customers. And the profit margins always whittle down. And the majority of businesses in this country run on profit margins of between 3, 4, 5, and 6%. That's all they get. ExxonMobil, the great and mighty ExxonMobil, they don't even make that. They make about a 2% profit margin, because the government's got their hands in everything they do. So I just want to show you, you think that guy's rich. He's not rich. His profit is $31,000 out of 440. Now here comes your good-intentioned government talking to a lot of ignorant folks who know nothing. It says, it's not right that those kids are serving at $7 an hour. That's a terrible minimum wage. You can't live on $7 an hour. We need to raise the minimum wage to $10 an hour. Okay, that's nice. That's a nice thing to say. But let's see what would happen right here on my example. Go back to the wages, and I want you to take a look at the wages right here. The first is what it costs per year. The next is percentage. The next is per month. But I broke it down to an hour. As I budget for the year, and businesses have to budget, and they have to stay within their budget or they go bankrupt. So I budget for the next year, and my budgeting is $70 an hour is all I can pay toward wages. So I got 10 kids working for me at $7 an hour. That's 70. The government now says you got to pay them 10. Let's see, 10 times 10, 100. I don't have 100. I only got 70. You know how I solve that problem? I lay 3 of them off. And now only 7 kids work for me. Goodbye. Goodbye. What am I supposed to manufacture the money out of thin air? That's all my budget has. Every time we've raised minimum wage, it's thrown young kids out of work. Before they started minimum wage, about 85% of kids were working in high school. When I started back when I was 1969, 70, we were all working. When they kicked in the minimum wage, we all got excited, and all of a sudden, a bunch of my friends lost their jobs. Now we have 50% of kids under 25 with no job. Because a business isn't going to hire a 16 or 17-year-old at a rate that's worth more than he is. I'll hire a 30-year-old for that buck, but I'm not going to hire a 15-year-old. One thing I know about 15 and 16-year-olds, they're not all that responsible. And if I got to shell out this much, let me find someone I can give it to. So I just want to show you how the government, command economy, thinking from the top, always has unintended consequences that are harmful. And so we saw on the Plymouth colony, and we saw in Jamestown, when they were communists, they were dying and starving. When they went to free market, everything prospered. So I know communism don't work. I know free market does work. I know you don't know either of that stuff, because everything I just taught you, you probably didn't know. Who's taught you that in your whole life? Why should you have to think of it? You're not expected. God's not asking you to be aristocrats. He's just asking you to work. But here's how these liars take advantage of you. Now what they do is they come along and say, hey, let's compromise. Let's blend the two systems. All right, let's see. I get the most out of free market. I get the least out of communist. If I blend, do I get more or less? Every time I compromise, I get less. Compromise is good. No, it isn't. God says separation is good. God says find the truth. Once you get it, stick to it. Or don't you have an open mind? No, not once I know truth. I mean, when I'm searching for truth, then I got to be open to try different things. But once I found it, now I'm open to one way and one way only, and I'm closed to everything else. Don't you have an open mouth? Won't you put anything in your mouth? Come on, why not? Don't you have an open mouth? You won't eat sewage? You won't eat poison? You won't eat refuse? Why? Why not? Because once you figured out what's food and what isn't, you only put food in your mouth. I just wish the two sides would get along. I hope they don't get along. I want right to triumph, and I want the wrong guys thrown out. Now, look, it's not going to happen down here because the sheep are so dumb, they actually think bad is good and good is bad. And whenever a good candidate shows up, he's trashed by the press because, remember, the press works for the devil. And whenever a bad candidate shows up, he's lifted up as some great savior like Jimmy Carter or Bill Clinton or Barack Obama. They lift him up like a savior. These guys are terrible. They were all bad. They were all anti-God, anti-God's principles, anti-Constitution. No, I don't want compromise. I want right to triumph. That's what I want. But if you don't understand the difference, then you think compromise is a good thing. And so I just want you to understand some of those things. All right, we're running out of time. Any questions? I don't like teaching this stuff. I don't like teaching this stuff. I know it, but whatever, have at it. The Lord's coming back. He'll fix it. Yeah.
It's not really a question, but talking about reducing the minimum or increasing the minimum wage.
Yes.
What's happened in little businesses that, this is an easy job. Once we put everything in place, this is an easy job a kid can do.
Yeah, yeah.
Now people are, adults raising families, and they're getting minimum wage jobs because everything is such a mess. And now they expect those stupid little jobs. For instance, toll collectors.
That's another thing entirely. Yeah. Yes. There's no need. There's easy. There's no need for a single toll collector anywhere in this country. Not today with the technology they have. That's a crony job, a government crony job. That's all it is. I don't even want to start teaching you this stuff. I don't want it. You'll get upset. You're better off staying ignorant and not knowing. I've learned to live with it. I'd rather you didn't even know it. Can I stop this stuff? Who are the people that pushed me into this stuff? Can I stop this stuff? Because I could start taking you down the last 7 years, showing you every mistake the government's made. It's only going to get you mad. What's the point? Forget about it. Forget about it. The Lord's going to come back. Government will be on his shoulders. Yes. What is it?
I was going to say, I'm already mad at the world for not liking Jesus.
Yeah. Amen.
I
Amen.
mean, it's a good thing that at least you know, but I understand you can confine it to a special class or something.
Everything they touch, they destroy. This country had the greatest medical system until they got their hands on it in the 60s with Medicare and Medicaid. And they've been systematically destroying it little by little. And now when they really get in charge of it, you got no idea what you're headed for. You folks, wait till you see what you're headed for. They when they took over, look, the doctors took care of the patients took care of the doctors. They set their own fee schedule. You can't pay me, give me a couple of chickens. You can't pay me chickens, I love you anyways, take care of it. Once they got involved, they set regulations in order, and you can't even do what you want. For example, as simple as a minimum wage. Years ago, if a guy owned a little delicatessen on a corner and he needed to have the stoop swept up in front of his place, but he was busy with other things, he'd hire a kid. Hey, kid, 12-year-old, you'd like to make a quarter? And sweep up my stoop. That's what he used to do. And the kid learned industry. The kid got a little reward. The kid got on the bottom rung of the ladder and wanted to work his way up. Now, that's against the law to do now. You do know that. The government criminalizes regular, normal activity, turns you into a criminal for committing it. That's what it does. It frames mischief by a law, like the Bible says. And they criminalize it. So now I can't do that. I can't hire the kid. So now the kid, instead of sweeping up my stoop, loiters, hangs out, gets other kids in front of my stoop, and does a lot of bad stuff right there. And these are the kind of things that have been going on. This never went on in a free market economy. It never went on. Yeah.
I would like to say that
Yeah. No, the public school is child abuse. The public school system is child abuse. Pouring garbage into their heads, teaching them about sex at the age of 5 years old, teaching them God doesn't exist, teaching them how to sleep with one another, how to pass out condoms. That's child abuse. Yes.
Wages they go up, but so is everything else. We wouldn't be able to afford.
You don't understand. That's not true. You don't understand. Again, no, it's not true. It's not true. Again, you've been taught wrong, and if it's messed up, the government messed it up. Go back to the experiment in America. Is that what happened in America? Is that what happened? Did people stay poor, or did a middle class burgeon? That's what happens in a free market economy. People work, they produce more goods, and all of a sudden the goods are available, and the stuff that used to be a luxury becomes commonplace to the middle class citizen. There was no problem with wages. Wages didn't go up. Again, you're not understanding what the government did with the monetary system. It corrupted the monetary system. The government drives wages up. I need another couple hours. I don't want to teach this. I'd rather you believe a lie, to be honest with you. I'm fed up with this stuff. I'm fed up with it. I'm fed up with it. Look, you read your newspapers, believe what you've heard. Go on. Jesus will straighten you out in the millennium. I don't want to take 50 hours straightening people out. But no, I can guarantee you, if there's something broke, the government broke it. If there's anything broke in the free market, whether it's your wages, whether it's inflation, whether it's the cost of healthcare, whether it's the cost of auto, anything broken, the government broke it. The free market worked. This country went like this, grew 100 times until all of a sudden we got the socialists like Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, and they started putting their things in place, and they've been destroying it ever since. And now you got increasing poverty, increasing wages. All the wages go up, goods go down. When the government stays away from something, the cost of a television is $4,000 to start, but you let people do research and development, then it's $2,000, then it's $1,000, then it's $500. It'll go down. It'll start going up again the minute the government gets involved. What the government will do is it'll raise their expenses. That's what they did in the medical industry. They'll say, well, you know what? I know you're using this equipment. This is what they do to us. You must throw your anesthesia machines after 3 years. Throw them away. Why? What if they came to you and said, all cars over 3 years old, get rid of them. You got to buy new cars. Your expenses are going way up. Now, they don't do that to families, but they do it to businesses. And our expenses go through the roof. We don't have the money, so we pass it on to you. Anytime you raise our expense, it goes in your price tag. That's what happens. Anytime they put a regulation or expense on us, goes right to you. When am I supposed to make it up? You're going to pay for it. Healthcare has gone up in the past few years. Why? Because now they told them, Obama said, you got to cover this, you got to cover third trimester abortion, you got to cover psychiatry. That's a big thing for them. You got to cover this. Say, I don't want to cover that. You got to cover it. All right, then I got to raise the cost to cover that. To raise the cost, I pass it on to you. 25% higher, 25% higher, 20. Just pass it right on. That's what happens. It's just that simple. Yeah. How would your wages go up? If it hadn't happened, the price never would have gone up. The price would have gone down, and your wages would have covered it. No, you got it backwards. You see, this is a man that doesn't understand, doesn't care to understand, and God bless him. It doesn't matter. But go, yes. Mm-hmm. It's such a mess. It's just the only one that's going to fix it is Jesus. Now look, I mean, I've studied this for so many years that honest to goodness, I theoretically could fix it. But if I tried, there'd be a revolt because there's so many freeloaders on the system now. I mean, and the Lord will do it. If the Lord came back today, 90% of government workers would be on the street the next day. You're done. You're finished. You're serving no purpose whatsoever, including the IRS. You better get real jobs, folks. You better get real jobs. Pushing papers and taking money from people that work, that ain't work. Digging farms, building things, growing, giving services, that's work, the Lord says. The rest of that stuff is all make work that lazy people have dreamed up. The whole government system is 90% of it's a complete scam. The honest government costs would be about 15% of what you're paying today. Our $3.8 trillion budget really is only about a $450 billion budget. It's all that we needed to take care of what God said. The rest of that money would sweep right into the society. The wealth in this nation would be overwhelming if government got lost. I think God's punishing this country with government. He's sick of these rank sinners, and so he's making you pay through the nose. That's what I think is going on. So on one hand, I understand it, want to fix it. On the other hand, it's like, give it to them, Lord. They want to believe a lie. Let them believe it. Pound them with it. And so, amen. He'll fix it when he gets back. But no. Prices don't go up when people work. Prices go down. Prices go down. So you don't need higher wages. But your wages, believe it or not, would go up. If you study it correctly, your wages do go up. When wages aren't going up, that's another story. Help them.
Like Walmart, when they raised the minimum wage, Walmart had to raise their payroll $100,000 per week, which 70% of their full-time employees had to get marked out to part-time employees.
Of course. I got a budget here. Somebody comes in and tells me what to do with my budget. That's the elite mentality of government and socialists. We know better than you do. If you know better than we do, why don't you start your own business? Why start your own business? Now, most of the people that work for government couldn't work in the private sector. I don't know if our president could actually work a real job. I don't know that he's capable of doing it. I know he's never worked one, but it's insane that a man who's never worked is the president of a nation. It's absolute insanity. But you folks voted for him. I showed you Alan Keyes and Obama, right? Did you see? Remember I showed you? Remember the debate between those two black men? They both ran for senator. The people had a choice. They voted for the wrong guy. One of the reasons it ain't going to get better is you're getting the leaders you deserve because you vote for them. I don't know what to say. Go ahead. Why do you think it's going up? Why do you think it's going up? Yes, of course it's going to collapse. It's already prophesied in the book of Genesis. I've already taught it when I did my Genesis teachings. Yes, of course it's going to collapse. It's right in the book. And yeah, but why do you think they're going up? I mean, why do you think prices are going up? That's right. I'll give you a couple of things that they did. Number one, ethanol. Ethanol. That's one of the dumbest things ever to come down the pike. I mean that's insane. Do you even know what ethanol is? Okay, we're going to turn off the tapes. We can go longer.